Here we have ARK Invest chief futurist Brett Winton talking about how companies are going to finance their prediction of $4 trillion in AI compute spend by 2030. We'll also hear his rebuttal to claims of an AI bubble, plus a small mention on Tesla and the multiomic space.
Brett, there's a meme going around showing OpenAI giving money to Oracle, giving money to NVIDIA, giving money back to OpenAI. Can you fill everyone in? Why is that going around? One, it's not 100% accurate, but that'll set us into the conversation.
Yeah, it's not accurate because OpenAI has a separate deal with Oracle to build some hundreds of billions of dollars of data centers out. And NVIDIA is going to sell OpenAI some chips to build out another on the order of $500 billion in data center. Along the way, they're also investing equity in OpenAI. So they're partly funding, you could say they're vendor financing the company that's going to buy their chips along the way. So people are saying, well, this is kind of funny. NVIDIA is taking its balance sheet and giving it to somebody who then turns around and buys, the meme is pays Oracle to buy NVIDIA chips. And so it does seem kind of circular. And I think that it is extraordinarily difficult to finance $500 billion in spend. And I think that, given our expectation for it's on the order of $3 to $4 trillion in AI compute spend in 2030, you're going to need to see a lot of money flow into this. And this is an indication of that.
Okay, so far, some comparisons being made online are to the .com bubble saying, right, this is circular. It doesn't make sense. There's no real customers here. Then there's a comparison, Brett, that you've made as well to the build out of the railroads in the US. And would love to dive into that. And one thing I've seen online and people talking about this is, the reason that this is so different from previous massive build outs, whether it was telco or rail, is that at least so far it has not been very debt driven, right? Like so far it's been social media cash flow driven, which is fundamentally different than debt financing. But that was a lot of talk. Take it.
Well, yeah. I mean, right now, basically OpenAI and xAI have gone out and raised equity to invest in this compute. There is already some kind of like intermingling of, if you think about that, OpenAI is paying not for the underlying compute, but paying an infrastructure as a service provider like Microsoft for the incremental compute, means that they are already having somebody else buy the hardware and they're paying along the way. They're paying an installment plan for use of these GPUs. And so the entire industry is in some ways set up for a different kind of like class of customers to own the hardware and then to sell it back to the users of that hardware. So that's something that's already happened. Some of the neoclouds that are specifically catering to OpenAI and Anthropic, like CoreWeave, they are also borrowing money in order to buy the chip. So the AI foundation model company is playing on an installment plan for the GPUs, and the person who's buying the GPUs is also taking NVIDIA equity and also, borrowing in the debt markets to some degree to build out the infrastructure. At some point, there's no doubt this is not going to end well. Like at some point, we're going to get over our skis. There's going to be maybe not too many GPUs out there, but too many GPUs in the wrong place, or too many GPUs that are owned by the wrong entity. And kind of there's going to be a restructuring of how this all happens. My read on where we are in the market is we're not there yet, as in like we have on the order of high hundreds of millions of active users of AI chatbots. I think it's going to go to 5 billion by 28, 29. And just right now, just catering, Nick disagrees, but just catering to those users requires a huge amount of compute, just even if their use doesn't change. And what's happening instead is actually, these things are beginning to work overnight on behalf of users. They're, the GPU intensity of each incremental user is also increasing. And so the big contrast to me between the .com model and this is in the .com model, because it was all indirectly monetized, because it was all advertising monetized, it meant that people could put out inventory for free and say, hey, this is going to be valuable because we're going to be able to sell ads around it. Whereas at least the current setup of the AI industry right now is they are directly charging users for use of these chips. And at least insofar as been publicly reported on certainly OpenAI, they're doing so in a way that's, not giving them away. It's gross profitable in how they're structuring their fees. And they're $200 a month users for these services.
Okay, so
people really like it.
So Brett, you're saying we're in like the second inning here.
Yes. Or, well, it depends on, how long the baseball game is going. But I think we're before the halfway point. I would say 1995 internet is where I'm at. And that's, Yahoo just accepted its first VC dollars. So there's a lot of probably big entities that will make a lot of money off this that haven't even yet really been defined or breached into the public consciousness. And there are some, and in 95, Cisco was around and they were promoting the internet mostly as a way to connect businesses together. And their stock had a, 25x to go from there to the peak of .com. And the overall market went up, on the order of 3x from 95 to the end of .com. And I think you actually have, potentially more headroom because right now we're still focused on this language space and everything that's going on with knowledge workers, but these chips are not just going to be useful for that. They're, OpenAI is going to try to push into robotics. Certainly Tesla will. I think that you'll need in the multi-omic space, you need like a lot more. So I think this is early days of the build out.
It's rather funny to see all these companies in a circle passing money to the left-hand side, but these companies are actually providing each other a lot of value. So this isn't just some infinite money glitch. Don't worry, guys. I'll let you know when I've found one of those. I am on the lookout. ARK's prediction is that there will be $4 trillion of AI compute spend in 2030 alone. So to get there, we do need to see some companies writing some serious checks to one another. So if companies like Oracle aren't giving OpenAI a bucket load of money, then in my opinion, there's no chance we're ever going to get to a $4 trillion in spend by 2030. Hans, what do you make of ARK's predictions, and how on earth do you think this gigantic project is going to get financed?
Well, I may be a little bit biased, but I definitely have to agree with ARK that we are in the very early innings still of a massive super cycle that people are just continuing to underestimate. And I think what this boils down to is the fact that there's just a lot of PTSD and fear and scar tissue about false promises that the technology industry has made about AI and about the types of things that computers and technology were going to be capable of that just haven't materialized yet. And AI specifically is an area of technology that has always held so much promise, and yet building it practically in the real world has been so difficult. And it's this difficulty that has built up a lot of healthy skepticism within the market around what AI is actually capable of. But that said, AI is no longer an immature industry or technology set that only has toy use cases. It's actually reached massive scale already, and there's just a ton of low-hanging fruit for problems that AI actually is 100% capable of solving today that either customers don't realize are possible or new companies haven't risen up yet to tackle that specific vertical use case. And so AI is just a whole new tool set to expand the scope and scale of problems that can be solved with computers, and the maturity of that tool set has gone through a massive transformation over the last 13 years. And it certainly doesn't look like the number of new problems that we can solve with AI is slowing down anytime soon. But beyond just this expanding TAM of addressable problems with AI, there's also a huge arms race dynamic that's going on between big companies and nations. Jonathan Ross, the chief architect behind Google's TPU architecture, actually had a great segment on this in an interview recently, where he said that he was talking to a room full of hedge fund managers that managed probably over $1 billion in assets. And of course, their question to him was, are we in an AI bubble? And he responded to them by asking, how many of you are confident that 10 years from now, AI won't be able to do your job as a hedge fund manager better than you can do it today? And 0 hands went up. To which Jonathan responded and said, that is exactly how every single one of these big hyperscalers feel right now today. So of course, these huge companies like Google and Microsoft are going to spend aggressively with their massive balance sheets to try to defend their position at the top of the mountain in this rapidly changing technology environment, which means that hundreds of billions of dollars and even trillions of dollars worth of capex spend on leading edge chips is just table stakes to continue to play in this game over the next decade. And so when you apply this existential level of logic that is not completely rational from a purely economic standpoint, you begin to understand where all of this money is coming from, not only from these big hyperscalers, but also from large nations as the sovereign AI trend begins to really gain steam in the coming years. But then we also need to take into account the fact that we are building out this new AI infrastructure on top of the rails that we already have in place with the internet to connect users to products, and then also the ubiquitous nature of internet payments that allow those customers to be monetized in an instant when a new product or service that really is valuable comes to market. And so the existence of all of this infrastructure that companies like OpenAI can leverage to become the fastest growing company that the world has ever known. According to a chart by Altimeter Capital, they reached a $10 billion annual run rate in just 2 years after the launch of ChatGPT, which is actually 3 years faster, a feat that actually took Google 5 years to achieve. So this ability to leverage the network of the internet and the existence of all of this ubiquitous payment infrastructure really accelerates the time to value capture, which in hindsight was one of the key drivers of the bust in the dot-com bubble. Ultimately, the internet was absolutely able to deliver on the amount of value that investors expected in 2000. But unfortunately, it just took much longer for that value to actually be realized because the underlying rails of the internet economy were not yet up to the task of supporting billions and even trillions of dollars worth of transactions. Now, with all of that said, I also do have to agree with Brett that there will be some companies that do go bust here, borrowing too much money in order to buy GPUs. In a market that is as supply constrained as the AI picks and shovels infrastructure market is today, it's kind of inevitable. And now with that caveat in place, you also have to recognize that in the case of OpenAI specifically, Sam is a master survivor and a master manipulator. He has shown over the course of his career an extreme talent at being able to leverage the hopes and fears of powerful people around him to accomplish his goals, even when things get really messy. So when you combine all of that together, you have to consider the possibility that OpenAI might not actually go bust in all of this. Even though that's a possible outcome, I definitely wouldn't want to make a specific bet against Sam here. So lastly, let's explore the question of how does all of this stuff get financed? And here there are basically going to be two different models for different classes of customers. The first is the hyperscalers. And I think this question breaks out and has two answers based on the class of customers, which we'll say are hyperscalers and then everyone else. And for the hyperscalers like Google and Meta and Amazon, these are all companies that can actually take all of this research that's being done into AI. They can apply it to the nuts and bolts of these massive businesses that they already have to increase their free cash flow. And so the clear model for the hyperscalers is that they're just going to continue to spend out of their massive balance sheets and their free cash flows as the market forces them to invest aggressively based out of a survival imperative. But also don't forget that these companies are massive businesses and that all of the research that they have poured into AI over the past decade has actually paid dividends in their ability to increase productivity and drive revenue growth. It is precisely their research into artificial intelligence that has actually fueled the massive profitability of the ad-driven models inside of Google and Meta over the past decade. And so it's not only possible, but also likely that they will continue to see ROI on these investments into infrastructure that helps to self-fund this flywheel of AI infrastructure build-out for many years to come. And then when we move beyond the hyperscalers to everyone else, that's where things get a lot more interesting. And so this non-hyperscaler segment of the AI infrastructure market is where you're beginning to see a lot of these creative and cooperative arrangements that help to facilitate these huge projects that are some of the largest infrastructure infrastructure buildouts we've ever seen in history. And so far, based on the deals that we've seen between NVIDIA and a number of other companies, these new deals are taking two distinct forms. The first form is what we've seen in the deals between OpenAI and NVIDIA, and also OpenAI and AMD. In both cases, what we see is that there needs to be about $100 billion worth of infusion of assets into OpenAI that in turn provides seed collateral that OpenAI can then go and use to bring in other investors from banks and other financial institutions. And then the other form of agreement that we see is NVIDIA's deal with CoreWeave to backstop minimum GPU demand, which helps to set a floor on CoreWeave's earnings, which then in turn makes CoreWeave a lot more attractive to lenders as they go out and try to secure debt to aggressively build out more capacity. And then when you step back and ask yourself the question, why is Jensen Huang and NVIDIA willing to make all of these investments into these companies that seem like they're so risky and non-conventional and even potentially circular? The answer to that question is clear. Every single one of the hyperscalers that I mentioned earlier, Amazon, Microsoft, Meta, and especially Google, all have their own in-house silicon efforts that they are all leveraging to try and reduce the amount of dependence that they have on NVIDIA's hardware and ecosystem. And so from Jensen's perspective, it makes a lot of sense to incentivize this portion of the non-hyperscaler market to continue to grow, because for the most part, all of that lives inside of the NVIDIA hardware and software ecosystem. So not only does he want these neocloud companies like Oracle and CoreWeave to succeed, he also wants OpenAI and xAI to succeed as well, because their models are actually developed on NVIDIA hardware, whereas if Google or Anthropic end up taking the lead in these frontier AI models, those are something that would be developed either on Google's TPU silicon or potentially on Amazon's Trainium silicon. And so a lot of these investments by Jensen are actually him utilizing his massive balance sheet and free cash flow to fight back against these hyperscalers, which are trying to displace him from the market. And so what we see playing out here is a massive war of ecosystems that has a tremendous amount of downstream applications for enterprise and consumer AI, as well as the development of robotics in the coming decade.
The conversation with Brett did segue onto AI being in the second innings. Hans, how do you think we know that we've left the first innings? What do you think the next innings will entail, and how do you think we're going to know once we're in there? And then also, there was a brief mention at the end about robotics and the multi-omic space. I think this is going to be big. I predict you think this is going to be big. Can you explain to the audience as to why you think this is going to be such an enormous extension to the AI market?
Well, to start with your question about how do we know if we've actually left the first innings of this massive AI supercycle, I guess it's somewhat a matter of definitions. When do you say that this whole thing actually started? And as far as I'm concerned, all of this really started with AlexNet back in 2012, which showed for the first time that we could really use neural nets running on GPUs to do useful and valuable work. And that kicked off a whole revolution of research in machine learning that Google, Meta, Netflix, Amazon, and lots of other big tech companies have been using ever since then to drive productivity growth and revenue expansion. It has actually been the application of these neural networks to the ad-based business model of companies like Google and Meta that has driven most of the phenomenal returns that those companies have experienced over the last decade. And then it's been a portion of these returns that they have been able to plow back into further R&D in AI that has then produced the follow-on breakthroughs that have led to innovations like ChatGPT. And so I would say that we've actually left the first innings of this AI super cycle because it's now broadened out into the consumer space beyond just being primarily a technology that only the biggest companies in the world can use to optimize their revenue. But with all of that said, I would still agree that we're in very early innings of this AI super cycle because there are still so many problems that we haven't even begun to solve with AI yet. From my perspective, I wouldn't even say that we have reached the halfway point of this game until consumer adoption of AI, just in the low-hanging fruit of today's form factors, websites, and other services, reaches at least over 50%. There's still so much low-hanging fruit to get out of using AI to optimize existing apps or websites on the internet, and so many people who have never used any chat service, whether that's ChatGPT or Gemini or Grok or any other option. And all of that's just talking about the apps, services, and websites that we already use today that could still get so much better with AI before we even talk about platform shifts. Things like voice interfaces and AR glasses in immersive virtual reality environments. Every single one of these platform shifts is only possible through the application of AI technology. But each and every one of these technologies will drive a fundamental new shift in consumer behavior and use cases. So then if you combine that with all of the AI-powered smart devices that we will increasingly be surrounded by, you can see how much untapped potential is still left on the table for AI to begin to address. And then to move on to your question about robotics and why that's such a huge extension of AI, well, every single one of the technologies that I've just talked about is really focused on improving our ability as humans to interact with the physical world around us that is actually quite dumb, apart from a few AI-powered smart devices. And this is where the AI robotics revolution comes in. Physical labor already accounts for a ton of value in the economy. And this is really what the entire Industrial Revolution was about. We began making machines that could supercharge our ability to accomplish physical labor tasks in the real world. And through this mechanization and early forms of automation, we were able to drive massive productivity gains in the economy that has pulled billions of people around the world out of poverty. But throughout the entire Industrial Revolution, and even most of the automation that we've been able to accomplish so far, our machines themselves weren't actually smart. The reality is that all of the automation that we have built up until the last few years was extremely brittle and extremely complicated, and it took a lot of effort by very smart software engineers in order to get these more and more complicated machines to do exactly what we wanted, when we wanted it, and how we wanted them to. And this lack of true organic intelligence is the reason why humanoid robotics has never been a feasible project for humanity until now. But with the advent of AI, we finally have the ability to actually create machines that can interact with the world around them in a way that is flexible enough and autonomous enough to actually be able to get more useful work out of that robot than it takes humans to put into programming it. And that's the real unlock. And so this ability of neural networks to actually be able to do intelligent work, combined with the fact that it's getting cheaper and easier to produce software using AI tools, is driving this inflection point where it's easier and easier and easier to get economically valuable, useful work out of robots of many form factors. And once that threshold has been crossed, it opens up a tremendous amount of possibilities to use robots to make new goods and new services at prices that we never could have imagined only a few short years ago. And so this application of AI to robotics is really a whole super cycle unto itself that is going to dramatically change the world around us in the coming decades. But with that said, the humanoid robots specifically like Optimus or Figure or Unitree is something that I think is going to take a little bit longer to really get started than most of my fellow Tesla fans would really hope. And the reason that I'm kind of skeptical on that specific use case in the near term is just that I don't even see a real viable prototype of a humanoid robot today. And while I love watching all of the cool demos from all of these companies, what we really haven't seen yet is a robot that can continuously do work on a single job for months at a time. In my opinion, that is actually the first viable prototype of the humanoid robotics form factor. And then once you can accomplish that, then the question is, okay, how do you take that and mass manufacture it? And that's when you get into the phase that Elon always talks about, where prototypes are easy and production is hard. And it's only after we've crossed that threshold that then we can even get into the phase of production is hard that Elon always talks about, which will still be an enormous lift and take probably many years. And then as far as the multi-omic space is concerned, that is definitely something that I'm excited about, but I am by no means an expert there. I just know that it will offer us the opportunity to really improve a lot of our medicines and healthcare outcomes. And that is something to be really excited about. Before we wrap, I have to say a huge thank you to my co-host, David. Besides being a great co-host with a great accent, David has been one of the key figures behind the scenes helping me to grow this channel from 1,000 to over 16,000 subscribers and to put out regular shows that reach millions of views every year. When he's not moonlighting with me, he usually works with businesses who want to leverage YouTube to grow their online presence, and he's looking to take on more. If you want to get more clients and more brand awareness for your business using YouTube, I definitely recommend him. You can book a free call with him using the link in the description below.